I decided to take the long way home that night, hoping the quiet road would calm my mind. The events of the day had left me feeling drained, and I needed to clear my head. There was something about driving at night that always helped. Maybe it was the stillness of the road, or the way the world seemed to shrink to just the reach of my headlights. Either way, I knew this drive was what I needed. The sun had set hours ago, and now the sky was a deep black, dotted with stars. The road stretched out ahead of me, a thin, winding ribbon of asphalt that seemed to disappear into the darkness. My car's headlights cut through the night, illuminating the road just far enough for me to see the next turn. I had taken this route before, but never this late, never this dark. It wasn't supposed to be a long drive, maybe an hour at most. I would be home before midnight, I thought, and then I could forget all about the mess at work, the argument with my girlfriend, and everything else weighing on me. But as I drove further into the night, the unease I had tried to leave behind started to creep back in. The road seemed longer than I remembered. It twisted and turned through dense woods, with tall trees looming on either side like silent watchers. I hadn't seen another car for miles, and the thought of how alone I was on this deserted road made my skin crawl. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was 11:30 p.m. I should have been closer to home by now, but the road seemed endless. The uneasy feeling in my gut grew stronger, but I tried to shake it off. It was just a quiet night drive, nothing more. I had taken this road before, and I knew it would eventually lead me home. But then something strange happened. As I rounded a sharp curve, I noticed something ahead of me on the side of the road. My headlights caught it for just a moment, a figure standing still, right at the edge of the woods. I slowed down instinctively, my heart skipping a beat. Who would be out here, in the middle of nowhere, at this time of night? The figure didn't move as I approached. It was a woman, dressed in a long, flowing dress. She was standing perfectly still, her back to the road, facing the woods. I couldn't see her face, only the long, dark hair that hung down her back. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I slowed to a stop. Something about her seemed off. She didn't seem like someone who had just wandered out here. She looked too still, too quiet, as if she was waiting for something. I rolled down my window slightly, leaning out to get a better look. "Are you okay?" I called out, my voice shaking. She didn't respond. She didn't even move. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I had expected her to turn around, to at least acknowledge that I was there, but she remained completely still. I debated whether I should get out of the car. Maybe she was in trouble. Maybe she needed help. But something inside me screamed that I should stay in the car, that something wasn't right. My gut told me to leave, to drive away, and not look back. And so I did. I rolled up the window and slowly pulled back onto the road. As I drove away, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see her move, to see her do something. But she just stood there, motionless, until she disappeared from view. My heart was racing, and my hands were shaking on the wheel. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it was just some woman who had wandered out here for some reason. Maybe she lived nearby, maybe she was lost. But deep down I knew something was wrong. That wasn't normal. I kept driving, trying to put as much distance between myself and that figure as I could. The road seemed to stretch on forever, winding through the woods like a never-ending maze. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. I glanced at the clock again. It was 11:45 p.m. I should have been home by now. Why was the road taking so long? I hadn't taken any wrong turns, had I? My mind raced as I tried to remember the route. I had driven this road dozens of times before, but now everything seemed unfamiliar. The turns were sharper, the trees thicker, the road narrower. It was as if the road itself had changed. Suddenly the radio crackled to life. I hadn't touched it, hadn't even thought about turning it on, but now the static-filled airwaves filled the car. I reached out to turn it off, but before I could, a voice came through the static. At first it was just a whisper, barely audible over the sound of the static. But then it grew louder, clearer. A woman's voice, soft and distant, as if she was speaking from far away. Don't stop," she said. "Don't look back." My blood ran cold. I slammed my hand down on the radio, turning it off. The car fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of my breathing and the hum of the engine. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I imagined it? Was I just tired, my mind playing tricks on me? I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, that I was just hearing things, but the fear gnawing at the back of my mind wouldn't go away. I pressed down on the gas, driving faster now. I just wanted to get home. I needed to get off this road, away from whatever was out there. The trees flew by in a blur, and the road twisted and turned beneath my tires. I had no idea how much further I had to go, but I knew I couldn't stop. Not now. The clock on the dashboard blinked to 12 a.m. midnight. The witching hour, my mother used to call it. The time when the veil between worlds was at its thinnest, when strange things happened. I had always laughed at her superstitions, but now, in the darkness of this endless road, I wasn't so sure. Suddenly, the car jerked, and I felt a thud beneath the tires. I slammed on the brakes, my heart leaping into my throat. The car skidded to a stop, and I sat there, breathing heavily, trying to calm my racing heart. What had I hit? An animal? A rock? I didn't want to get out of the car. Every instinct screamed at me to stay inside, to keep driving, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. What if it was something serious? What if my car was damaged? Reluctantly, I unbuckled my seatbelt and opened the door. The cold night air hit me like a wall as I stepped out onto the road. I walked around to the front of the car, my flashlight in hand, and shone it on the road. There was nothing there. I frowned, my heart still pounding in my chest. I had felt something. I was sure of it, but the road was empty. No sign of an animal, no rock, no debris. Just the empty black asphalt stretching out in both directions. I stood there for a moment, shining my flashlight around, trying to make sense of what had happened. But no matter how hard I looked, there was nothing there. I shook my head, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread that was creeping up my spine. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the road had just shifted under the tires. I needed to get back in the car and keep driving. As I turned to head back to the car, something caught my eye. A shadow, just at the edge of the woods, moving between the trees. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was her, the woman in the dress. She was standing just a few feet away, half hidden by the trees, watching me. Her face was still obscured by her hair, but I could feel her eyes on me, cold and empty. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away, my hands shaking. I had to get out of here. I had to leave now. I ran back to the car, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands fumbled with the keys as I started the engine, my eyes darting around, looking for any sign of her. But she was gone. The road was empty again. I didn't wait. I didn't hesitate. I floored the gas pedal and sped down the road, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The road seemed even darker now, the trees closing in around me like a suffocating blanket. The headlights barely cut through the thick fog that had settled over the road. I could feel the weight of the night pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. The clock on the dashboard read 12:15 a.m. How much longer could this road go on? I should have been home by now. I should have seen something, a sign, a house, anything. But there was nothing, just the endless winding road and the dark trees. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the road began to change. The trees thinned out and the road widened. The fog lifted, and in the distance I could see the faint glow of lights. My heart soared with relief. Finally, I was almost home. But as I drove closer, my relief turned to confusion. The lights weren't from a town or a house. They were streetlights, old and flickering, lining a road that led to a small gas station. The gas station looked abandoned, its windows dark and cracked, the old sign creaking in the wind. But the lights were on, casting an eerie glow over the empty parking lot. I pulled into the parking lot, my headlights sweeping over the old gas pumps. Something about this place felt wrong, but I was too exhausted to care. I needed a break, even if it was just for a few minutes. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, taking deep breaths to calm myself. The gas station was quiet, the only sound the soft rustling of the wind through the trees. I could see a payphone near the entrance, and I thought about calling someone, anyone, just to hear a familiar voice. But I didn't have any change, and my phone had no signal out here. With a sigh, I stepped out of the car and walked towards the gas station. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and the bell above the door jingled weakly. The inside of the station was just as abandoned as the outside. Dust covered the old shelves, and the faint smell of gasoline lingered in the air. I walked over to the counter, half expecting someone to be there, but it was empty. There was no sign of anyone, no sign that anyone had been here for a long time. I glanced around, feeling the unease grow stronger. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones. But before I could turn to leave, I heard it. A soft whisper, coming from the back of the store. "Don't stop. Don't look back." My blood ran cold. It was the same voice I had heard on the radio. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was no one there. The store was empty. I didn't wait to hear it again. I ran out of the gas station, not caring about the noise I made. I jumped into my car and started the engine, my hands shaking. I didn't look back as I sped out of the parking lot, the tires screeching on the pavement. The road ahead seemed endless, but I didn't care. I just kept driving, my foot pressed down hard on the gas pedal. I didn't know where I was going anymore. I just needed to get away. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. I couldn't tell anymore. The road seemed to blur together, and the trees melted into a dark, endless wall on either side of me. The clock on the dashboard was stuck at 12:15 a.m., no matter how long I drove. And then, just when I thought the road would never end, I saw it. A familiar landmark, a sign I had passed earlier in the night. My heart skipped a beat as I realized where I was. I was back where I started. The same stretch of road, the same twisted trees, the same darkness pressing in on all sides. No matter how far I drove, I was trapped, stuck in some endless loop of night. And then I saw her again, the woman in the dress. She was standing in the middle of the road this time, her head tilted to the side, her hair falling over her face. She was waiting for me. I slammed on the brakes, my car screeching to a halt just a few feet away from her. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to make sense of what was happening. She didn't move. She just stood there, silent and still, like a ghost. And then, slowly, she lifted her head. Her eyes were hollow, empty voids, and her mouth twisted into a sickening grin. She took a step towards the car, and I felt a scream rising in my throat. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't let her get any closer. I threw the car into reverse, my tires spinning wildly as I backed away. But no matter how fast I went, she kept getting closer, her grin widening with every step. I slammed on the gas, speeding down the road as fast as I could. But it didn't matter. She was always there, just ahead, waiting for me at every turn. No matter how far I drove, no matter how fast I went, I couldn't escape her. The road never ended, and neither did the night.